Have you ever loved someone so much that you lost yourself in the process? Have you ever given everything, your time, your money, your trust, only to be pushed aside in the most important moment of their life? My name is Abigail, and this is the story of how my own daughter excluded me from the very wedding I had paid for. Not because I didn't love enough, but because in their eyes I was someone whose money mattered, but whose presence did not. But you know what? I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't lash out in fury. I answered with silence, with a canceled transfer, and with, for the first time in 22 years, the choice to love myself. This is a story about a mother's right to be respected, about awakening after years of being exploited in the name of family. And above all, it's the journey of reclaiming self-worth, not with tears, but with the decision to stop feeding toxic relationships. If you've ever been the one who gave without limits, then perhaps you'll see yourself in this story. Chapter 1. The First Loss. I never thought I would become a widow at 37, but life never asks for your permission before it takes everything away. That Tuesday evening was as ordinary as any other. Tracy was sitting at the dining table, hunched over her algebra homework, chewing on her pencil as usual. Luke was pretending to study English, but I knew he was really sketching basketball plays in the margins of his notebook. I was washing the dishes, hands wet mine, wondering about what to cook for tomorrow, when David suddenly made a strange sound. It wasn't a cry, nor was it a word. I turned around and saw him swaying, clutching his chest, his face turning ashen like a winter sky. He only managed to say one sentence. Tracy, call 911 now. I don't know how I managed to stay calm in that moment, but somehow I did. They worked on him for 47 minutes. I counted every second, standing outside in the front yard, surrounded by neighbors whose faces mirrored mine, stunned, worried, unwilling to believe what was unfolding. 47 minutes of chest compressions, electric shocks, medical jargon I couldn't begin to understand. And the entire time my two children hovered behind me, asking over and over, "Is Dad okay, Mom? He's going to be fine, right?" All I could say was, "Yes, sweetheart, Dad will be fine." But David wasn't fine. He never came back. They told me he was gone on the way to the hospital. I didn't even know until hours later, after papers had been signed and decisions had been made without him. At 37, I lost my husband. Tracy was just 15, Luke 13, and right there in that hospital waiting room with its cold fluorescent lights and bitter coffee that tasted like burned out hope, I made myself a promise. One that would define the rest of my life, that my children would never feel abandoned again. That night, I tucked them into bed, though neither of them could sleep. I answered questions no child should ever have to ask about funerals, about life insurance. Looking into their tear-reddened eyes, I swore silently that I would do everything. I would be both father and mother, their protector, their anchor, their only safe place, for as long as they needed me. What I didn't know was that this vow would become the very chain that bound my life for the next 2 decades. Chapter 2. The Mother Who Disappeared Behind Sacrifice. At first, my sacrifices were so small, they barely seemed to matter. A canceled dinner because of Tracy's dance rehearsal, a night out with friends replaced by sitting courtside at Luke's basketball game. In those early days, I always told myself, it's just this once. But then, just this once became routine. And routine slowly hardened into a way of life. I remember vividly the evening Helen, my closest colleague at the law firm, invited me out to dinner exactly 1 month after David passed. I said no. Tracy had her very first dance performance. 6 months later, Helen asked again, this time for her birthday. But that night, Luke had a crucial game that determined whether his team advanced. After that, Helen never asked again. Without realizing it, I had slipped out of the adult world entirely. I began taking on extra hours at Morrison & Associates, the law firm, where I worked as an accountant, staying late nearly every night. Overtime pay wasn't for pretty dresses or weekend getaways, but for Tracy's dance classes, for Luke's leather gloves, and most importantly, for building their college fund. It was all on me now, and there was no room for mistakes. I once slept in my car at an out-of-state basketball tournament just to save the hotel fee. I turned weekend budgeting into an art form, weighing every dollar spent with meticulous care. Because to me, every dollar saved was one step closer to a better future for my children. I watched my peers start dating again, take pottery classes, join book clubs, or enjoy weekend beach trips. And me, I didn't need any of that. I found meaning in Tracy's report cards in Luke's game-winning shots. Their achievements were my achievements. Their smiles were the greatest reward I could imagine. Janet, a friend from high school, once called me a true hermit during one of her rare check-in calls. She said, "Abby, you need a life outside those two kids. They'll grow up and leave one day." And then, I brushed it off with a laugh, because to me, this was love. Being a mother meant sacrifice. It meant showing up 24/7. It meant never asking for anything for myself. 20 years passed that way. And when Tracy called me from Portland, bubbling with excitement to tell me she was engaged to Paul, I didn't hesitate for even a second before asking, "What do you need me to do?" I had no way of knowing that this sweet invitation would lead me straight into the deepest wound of my motherhood. Chapter 3, a one-way ticket to Santorini. I still remember the day Tracy called to tell me she was engaged. She practically screamed into the phone, "Mom, Paul proposed to me this morning at the top of Crater Lake." You wouldn't believe it. There was the sunrise, the ring, and hot chocolate. I almost swallowed the ring because I didn't know he had hidden it at the bottom of the cup. I burst out laughing, tears welling in my eyes. Partly because I was so moved that my daughter had found someone who truly loved her, and partly because she had chosen me, the very first person she wanted to share her joy with. Then her voice softened, dropping to a whisper as if afraid someone might overhear. "We're thinking about having the wedding in Santorini, Greece. There's this villa overlooking the caldera. Every sunset there looks like a painting. But it's really expensive, Mom." I didn't even let her finish. "How much is it, sweetheart, Mom?" "I wasn't planning on asking you for money, but the villa requires a $30,000 deposit to hold the date, hire the photographer, book the catering, and reserve a yacht for after the ceremony." I didn't need time to think. "I'll transfer it this afternoon." There was silence on the other end. Then I heard her sob. "I can't believe it. Mom, you've just made my dream come true." I sat there alone in the kitchen, phone still clutched in my hand. The feeling was like I had just handed her a piece of magic, and I truly believed I'd done the right thing. Because to me, being a mother meant making the impossible possible for your child. That afternoon, I walked into the bank, carrying the savings book I had guarded for 20 years. The teller looked at me skeptically as I filled out the international transfer slip. "Are you certain this is the largest transfer I've seen all day?" he said. I smiled, my voice unnervingly steady. "Do it. It's for my daughter's wedding." That evening, I called Tracy on video. Her face was glowing, practically radiant. She twirled her ring, gushing about wedding photos at sunset, the yacht party, the ceremony perched on the cliffside. I sat and listened, laughing at every laugh she shared. Then later, I opened my laptop and made a personal checklist. I researched traditional Greek wedding rituals, local restaurants, seasonal weather. I even booked my flight early, choosing a window seat so I could watch the Aegean Sea below. I started morning yoga, adjusted my diet, and even planned to buy a lavender-colored dress, Tracy's favorite shade for the big day. I was ready to be the radiant mother of the bride. Never in my life had I felt so close to my daughter. Never had I believed so completely that our bond was unshakable. And yet, just a few months later, she would be the one to sever that bond with her own hands, and I, the woman who had lived for her children for over 2 decades, would have to learn at last how to live for myself. Chapter 4. If you really want, you could zoom in through Google Earth. That morning, I was at the office, coffee cup in hand as usual. Tracy called right at 8:30. I picked up, still glowing with excitement after finding a pair of shoes online that would match perfectly with the lavender dress I planned to wear at her wedding. Hi, sweetheart. How's everything going with the preparations? I just read about a beautiful Greek wedding ritual, Mom. I need to talk about something serious. She cut me off, her voice dry, stripped of its usual spark of excitement. I felt something shift like the ground beneath me was sliding out of its orbit. Paul and his parents are reviewing the guest list, and there have been a few changes. I set my coffee cup down. What kind of changes, honey? The resort in Santorini is limiting the number of guests. That cliffside area, they have very strict safety regulations. I tried to stay calm, though my heartbeat was already faltering. What are you saying? Tracy paused for a moment. Then, as though reciting a rehearsed script, she rushed out the words, Paul's parents want the wedding to feel private, elegant, and intimate. They think that having only a small group will keep the atmosphere more dignified. I kept waiting for the words I knew were about to come. So, we think maybe you could watch the ceremony through a live stream. You could even zoom in on the beach area with Google Earth. It's pretty much the same. I thought I'd misheard her. My chest tightened like a vice. What do you mean, Tracy? It's nothing personal, Mom. It's just everyone thinks it would be better if you didn't appear in person. The rest of her words blurred. All I remember is that she kept talking, kept justifying, kept trying to wrap a merciless decision in soft, careful language. I stood up and turned toward the window. Oregon rain slid down the glass in long streaks like tears. The family photos in my home, the picnics, the ballet recitals, Luke's basketball championships, suddenly felt like evidence of a devotion that had always been taken for granted. So you've already decided, I asked. Not angry, not shouting, just needing to know I'd heard correctly. Silence. Then she let out a small laugh, brief, distant, tinged with shame. I know you understand, Mom. You always understand everything. My eyes fell on David's photo hanging on the wall. He was still smiling there, his arm wrapped around my shoulders, and the kids, his gaze full of hope for the future. But now he was gone, and I, the one who had stayed, was being pushed aside by my very own daughter. I drew a long, steady breath. Have a wonderful day, Tracy. And I hung up. My hands trembled slightly, but inside I was utterly calm. Strangely, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the weight of responsibility to fix everything to plead to prove my worth. I only felt one thing with crystalline clarity: I did not deserve to be treated this way. And the child I had raised, protected, and loved for 22 years had just taught me a lesson I should have learned long ago. Not everyone values the quiet sacrifices made for them. And when the one who sacrificed finally stands up and walks away, they will never turn back. Chapter 5. No one calls it responsibility anymore. That night I did not cry. I brewed myself a cup of ginger tea and sat down in the old armchair by the window, the very spot where David used to sit, reading before the kids went to bed. Everything in this little house was a reminder of when we were still a whole family. Now I was the only one left, and even the memories had begun to crack at the edges. I didn't blame Tracy, not entirely. I blamed myself for letting things spiral this far. I had taught her that I would always be there, rain or shine, day or night. I had taught her that my love was endless, my money always available, never needing to be asked for. I had never set boundaries, and now my daughter had learned to treat affection as a commodity, something to be traded, leverage controlled. The next day, when I walked into the gleaming halls of the bank, I had already made my decision. No tears, no sighs. Mrs. Collins, the bank manager, looked from his screen up to me with clear surprise. You want to cancel the $45,000 transfer? Yes, I said, my eyes steady. Immediately. I could tell he was waiting for an explanation, for a flicker of hesitation. But I offered him nothing, because for the first time in over 2 decades, I was choosing myself. After leaving the bank, I didn't drive home. Instead, I went to a spa tucked away in the pine forest outside town, the place I had once dreamed of retreating to after Tracy's wedding. But now there was no need to wait. I booked a room, for one. The funny thing was, I thought I'd feel lonely, but I didn't. I felt relieved, as though I had finally taken off an armor I'd worn for so long I had forgotten how heavy it was. During the hot stone massage, the therapist Maria whispered softly, "Your body is wound so tight, like you've been carrying the whole world on your shoulders." I laughed lightly. I just put that world down. That night, I slept straight through till morning. No checking my phone, no restless spirals over things beyond my control. And for the first time in 22 years, I woke up without feeling responsible for anyone but myself. Chapter 6. When I was no longer the family bank. I thought things would settle down for a few days. I thought I'd finally get a little time to breathe, to savor the feeling that I had just done the right thing. I was wrong. The very next afternoon, while I was rearranging the spice jars in the kitchen, a small task that gave me a strange sense of control, I heard a car screech to a halt outside my house. Then came furious pounding on the door so hard I thought the frame might crack. It was Luke, my son. His face was flushed, whether from anger or from speeding all the way from Portland I couldn't tell. He barged into the house as if he were still 17. As if I were still the kind of mother who could fix everything with a hug and a few comforting words. "Tracy is losing her mind," Luke snapped. "The resort keeps calling, saying if they don't get the rest of the money by tomorrow, they'll cancel everything." I nodded, turning back to the row of tea jars. "That does sound stressful." Luke froze, staring at me like he hadn't heard me right. "Mom, are you listening? They're going to cancel the entire wedding if the money doesn't come through. Aren't you going to do something?" I carefully placed the chamomile tin back on the shelf and said evenly, "No, because this isn't my responsibility anymore." The look on his face was the same one he'd worn the first time he fell off his bike, confused as to why it hurt so much. But this time, instead of a scraped knee, it was his pride that was wounded. Because for the first time in his life, I had refused to help. "You can't back out now. You promised." I promised nothing. I cut him off. I gave Tracy $30,000. That was a gift, not a blank check for a wedding I'm not even invited to. Luke began pacing the room as though rehearsing a debate. Out came the familiar arguments. Tracy's under so much pressure. Paul's parents have high expectations. This is the most important day of her life. And finally, the one I had dreaded. "But expected, Mom. You've always been there, whenever we needed you." And that was the heart of the problem. I had always been there, never absent, never saying no, never letting them face the consequences on their own. But today I stood firm, unmoving. "Luke, you've gotten used to me being an endless source of support. But I'm not. I'm a human being, not a limitless bank account. And I am under no obligation to finance a wedding my daughter has decided I'm not worthy of attending." He faltered. In his eyes I saw confusion and a flicker of fear, because he realized his mother had changed. His mother could no longer be swayed by a few tears or a guilt trip. "So you're really going to let this wedding fall apart?" His voice cracked. I looked directly at my son, the boy I once carried on my back, held through fevers, bought his very first baseball glove, and I said, "I'm not letting anything fall apart." Tracy did that herself when she cut me out of her life, but still expected my money to flow in. "Mom, please, Tracy will fall apart." I gave him a sad smile. Sometimes you have to let someone fall so they can learn how to stand without leaning on their mother. I pointed toward the door. "Now I need some peace. You should go." Luke walked out of my house like someone shoved out of the only world he knew. But I didn't feel guilty. I only felt relieved. I was no longer the family bank. I was a mother with limits, a mother with self-respect. And it was time my children learned that. Chapter 7. Silence worth its weight in gold. After Luke left, the house became strangely quiet. No ringing phone, no pounding at the door, no guilt-laden messages, no desperate pleas. only the ticking of the clock and the faint fragrance of jasmine tea drifting through the kitchen. I made myself a cup of tea. The simple act of pouring hot water into my familiar white porcelain mug felt like a ritual, a reminder that I was still here, a whole person, independent with feelings with worth, not just a walking wallet in my children's eyes. I sat at the dining table looking out of the window at the small garden behind the house. The lavender I had planted back in the spring was still in bloom, soft purple resilient, just like me now. The phone remained silent, no calls, no texts. A small part of me, the mother who had spent years worrying, accommodating, started to wonder. Was Tracy crying herself dry? Was she so desperate she couldn't stand anymore? Then I remembered her exact words. If you really want to be there, you could zoom in from the satellite. Ha! That was the sharpest blade of all. Not the exclusion itself, but the cold disdain. As if I were nothing more than a financial accessory, convenient but disposable, as long as my money arrived on schedule. I sipped the tea warmth spreading through my chest. The next day, I did something I never imagined I would do. I booked a full spa retreat at the Sun River Wellness Lodge, a place I had always considered far too indulgent, meant only for women with time, with money, and without children clinging to them. But now I had all 3 time money and no one making demands. On the drive to the lodge, I rolled down the window to breathe in the sharp scent of Oregon pine. The wind tangled through my hair, sweeping away the last traces of guilt, still trying to cling inside me. I wasn't running away. I was finding myself again. At check-in, the receptionist asked, "Would you like your phone set to do not disturb?" I smiled. "I'll just leave it in the car. Consider me gone from the world for 48 hours. The look on her face, that wordless recognition, that silent solidarity told me I wasn't alone. Many women had stood on this threshold before, worn down by sacrifice, finally choosing to stop. My room overlooked a quiet pond, its surface smooth as glass. I opened the window, drew a deep breath, then sat on the wooden chair by the porch, letting the late sunlight paint my hair gold. No texts, no knocking, no "Mom, can you help me?" Only me and silence, but not the kind of silence that comes with loneliness. This silence was precious like gold because for the first time I felt free. Free from the chains of being the mother who carries the whole world. And in that moment, I knew I had no regrets. Not because I withheld money, but because for the first time in my life, I chose not to let myself be taken for granted anymore. Chapter 8. A Decision Without Retreat. I spent 2 full days at the Sun River Wellness Lodge as if it were my first escape. Not from my children, but from the perfect mother image I had built for 22 years. And in the stillness of the spa, amid the sound of water trickling and the faint fragrance of lavender, I heard something that had been missing from my life for far too long. The sound of my own breathing. For myself. On the 3rd morning, I drove back home. It felt like a pilgrimage, not to my house, but back to myself. I stopped at the old bakery where David used to buy me raspberry tarts on our anniversaries. For the first time in years, I bought one just for me. Not to bring home for the kids, not to split in half. Just one small, perfect tart, sweet enough to bring me to silence. And then the phone began to ring. Missed calls, texts, voicemails, emails, all from Tracy, each one more frantic than the last. The sharp words were gone, replaced with "Mom. Please call me back. I was wrong. I know I was terrible. I need you. I need you here. I don't know what to do anymore." And that was when I finally admitted the truth I had avoided for years. Tracy had never learned the true weight of consequences, because I had always stepped in to fix everything. But not this time. I stayed silent, and my silence made her unravel. As for me, I ate my tart slowly, savoring it, almost amused. Amused that it had taken me 2 decades to realize unconditional love should never mean limitless love. 3 days later, there was a knock at the door. Not Tracy, not Luke. It was Sophia, Tracy's best friend from high school. She clutched her handbag tightly, eyes avoiding mine. Miss Abigail, I know this is forward of me, but Tracy asked me to come. I invited her in, made 2 cups of tea, listened as she said the words I had already predicted. They've lost the Santorini villa. The photographer couldn't wait any longer. The yacht party is canceled. Everything's falling apart. I nodded. Paul's parents are furious. They say Tracy is incompetent, that she can't keep her promises. I nodded again. Then, Sophia finally looked me in the eyes, her expression earnest, almost pleading. Tracy wants to know, if there's any way you could forgive her. I set my teacup down. No rush, no anger, just clarity. There isn't. Not because I was angry, but because I was awake. I told Sophia, and in truth I told myself, the words I had long been afraid to say aloud. I do not regret loving Tracy, but I would regret it if I kept allowing that love to be exploited. Sophia fell silent for a few seconds, then nodded as though she had just learned something her best friend's mother had never taught her. You deserve more than that, Ms. Abigail. Her words, gentle though they were, became the period at the end of an old chapter, and also the first toll of the bell that opened a new one, a chapter where I would no longer be the one who endures. Chapter 9. When the sandcastle collapsed, I'd lost count of how many times I had saved Tracy from messes of her own making. But this time was different. This time I stayed outside. I let it collapse. A week after Sophia's visit, Luke called again. His tone was sharp and patient without even the courtesy of a greeting. Tracy canceled the Santorini wedding. I answered simply, I know. He sighed. They're holding the ceremony instead, in the backyard of Paul's relatives in Hillsborough. Don't worry, nobody's asking you for anything anymore. Nobody's asking any more. Yes, because no one believed I'd rescue them again. Then Luke said something I probably should have heard years ago. You know, Mom. Tracy kept looking around the whole ceremony, like she was still hoping you'd show up. I didn't answer right away. Something inside me twinged, but it wasn't sadness. It was the realization that I no longer felt responsible. That was her choice, I said, and the price she pays is part of growing up. Luke went quiet. Maybe he was beginning to understand, albeit late. I pictured the ceremony, plastic chairs set up on uneven grass, a simple potluck spread cooked by relatives. The bride in a last-minute dress from Nordstrom Rack wedding photos, taken by a teenage cousin with a Costco camera. No Santorini, no sunsets over the caldera, no yacht party, no glittering dream, and no me. I wasn't glad about it, but I wasn't sad either. I was at peace. After that call, I made myself a cup of ginger honey tea and sat on the porch. The sun was setting behind Oregon's ridges, not as dazzling as Santorini, but far more serene. I thought of what Sophia had said to me days before. You deserve more than that, Ms. Abigail? She was right. I didn't just deserve to be in the picture, I deserved respect. And if I couldn't have that, I'd rather stand outside than force myself into the role of the great mother in a hypocritical play. The wedding was done. No Santorini, no mother, no regret from me. Only a hush of silence like the wind brushing past the empty chair where I might have sat. Chapter 10. If I don't have a seat at the table, then I won't pay for the meal. 6 months had passed since the day I canceled the $45,000 transfer. 6 months since I told Tracy, have a wonderful day, and placed the final period on my role as a walking wallet. Life afterward, strangely enough, didn't feel empty. It felt fuller than ever. I began learning how to live without a phone in my hand all day. No more midnight calls asking Mom, what did I do wrong? Or Mom, can you help me with just one more payment? The silences I used to fear became the very space where I finally heard myself. I took morning walks, sipped coffee on the porch, and joined a book club I'd always put off. My new friends and I had just finished a novel about a woman abandoned by her family, who then rediscovered her own worth. I laughed when I read the last chapter, not because it was funny, but because I was living it. Luke no longer called often. Tracy. She still texted occasionally, but only when she needed something. Mom, I need a little help to take Max the puppy to the vet. Mom, we're short on rent this month. We ran into some trouble. I replied with the calm I had cultivated at the spa retreat. I hope you find the right solution for your little family. No guilt. No being dragged into the whirlpool of emotions. No longer someone remembered only when a bill needed paying. And one evening, as I was folding the blanket on the sofa, I recalled the words of the receptionist at Sun River Lodge on my very first visit. First time choosing yourself, isn't it? Yes, and not the last. I returned there on the 6-month anniversary, booked the same room. The scene was unchanged, the still pond, the drifting mist. But I was changed a new me who had learned that love doesn't mean erasing yourself until others forget you are human. That night, soaking in the mineral hot spring, I smiled and thought, if my love isn't worthy of a seat at the table, then my money isn't needed to pay for the meal. A new rule to live by. A declaration. Now I was no longer the silent shadow behind my children's triumphs. I was Abigail Collins, a woman strong, wise, and unapologetic for choosing herself. And if you, the one hearing this story, have ever felt exploited in the name of family, I want you to remember, this true love does not exclude you from the table. And sometimes revenge doesn't need to scream. It only needs silence and the quiet act of reclaiming your worth. I did not show up at the wedding. I wasn't there to stand beside my daughter as she walked down the aisle. I no longer sent unconditional transfers or rushed to answer every message that began with, I just need a little help. But I did something I hadn't dared to do in 22 years. I chose myself. And you know what? Silence can be a form of revenge, gentle but cutting deep. No shouting, no tears, just stepping back at the right moment and letting them face the consequences of their own choices. If you've ever felt disregarded, exploited in the very relationships that should have cherished you most, remember this love does not mean self-erasure, and you deserve a seat at the table you helped create.